Hello students and welcome to the lecture. So students, as we know that we are covering the historical background of the Indian Constitution, and basically you could say that these are the topics we have scheduled for the discussion under this particular series. Like we are going to talk about the introduction, then the company rule, then the crown rule, then the interim government, and then the first cabinet of Free India. All right. So these are the topics which we have scheduled for the discussion. Out of these, basically we have done with the introduction. We are left with the company's rule, or you can say we had been discussing about the company's rule in last two lectures. And basically the topics which we haven't started so far are these one. Okay. So this is the picture we have created together so far. So we will start from where we have left in the previous lecture. All right. Like till the Charter Act of 1813 we had covered. So now we are going to start with the Charter Act of 1833. All right. This act was the final step towards the centralization in the British India. All right. It means that first the British emphasized on the centralization. Thereafter, they had provided some liberty, and you can say they promoted the semi-centralized structure. Why? Because as we had seen that they had granted the powers to the local governments for imposing tax and tariffs. All right. So basically, in the Charter Act of 1833, it means that against these are the royal orders. Basically, they started the emphasization towards the centralization in British India. Okay. So what were the features of this act? First, it made the Governor General of Bengal as the Governor General of India. Okay. And vested in him all civil and the military powers. Thus, the act created for the first time the government of India having authority over the entire territorial area possessed by the British in India. All right. So here is the twist. Like we could say through the Regulating Act 1773. Okay. Basically, they had assumed the control over Bengal Presidency. All right. Bombay Presidency and Madras Presidency, right? And basically, the Bengal got the new post Governor General, and the Bombay and the Madras had their old governor system, right? And they both now required to assist to the Bengal's presidents, or you can say the Governor General of Bengal, right? So here, basically, what they had emphasized that basically this is the government of Bengal only. Right? But in the Charter Act of 1833, they had converted the post of Governor General of Bengal into the Governor General of India. All right. It means that now they had created a new post of Government of India. So the Governor General of Bengal, which was earlier responsible for the governance and the administration of Bengal particular, and you can say governance and the administration of Bombay and Madras in general. All right, now had became the head of the entire Indian territory, which were under the control of the British. It means that right now the Governor General of India had the responsibility to ensure the administration governance, whether it's a civil or the military, in all the territories, Bengal presidencies, Bombay presidencies, and the Madras presidency. So that is the, you can say, main change which had been introduced through the Charter Act of 1833. Okay, it means that the dispersed territories were now consolidated with each other. All right, and the first Governor General of India was Lord William Vantic. All right, so basically here we have got two things, like the Regulating Act 1773 created the new post Governor General of Bengal, and the first such person was Lord Warren Hastings. Thereafter, Charter Act of 1833 created the new post Governor General of India, and first such person was Lord William Bantic. Got it? So this is the direct questions which could be asked you in the examination. All right, so remember this thing. It deprived the governor of Bombay and Madras of their legislative powers. The Governor General of India was given exclusive legislative powers for the entire British India. The laws made under the previous act were called as regulations, while laws made under this act were called as an act. All right. So basically there are two things. Like if we talk about the Bengal presidency, all right, thereafter what we had the Bombay presidency, all right, and then we had the Madras presidency. Okay, and their respective heads were Governor General, Governor, and Governor. All right. However, the Governor of Bombay and the Madras presidencies was supposed to report to the Governor General of Bengal presidencies, but still they have their separate legislative powers. All right. So that is the, you can say, the scenario before the Charter Act of 1833. All right. But after the Charter Act of 1833, these powers were revoked. It means that the governors of Bombay and the Madras presidencies, their powers of legislative nature had been deprived of respectively. It means that the governors of Bombay and Madras were no longer in the power to make separate rules and regulations. Alright, and you could say whatsoever the rules and regulations would be made by the Governor General of India would be uniformly implemented in all the territories of British control in India. Whether these territories under the Madras presidencies, Bombay presidencies, or Bengal presidencies. Okay, it doesn't matter anymore. Thereafter, the laws which were made under the previous act, it means that the acts before the Charter Act of 1833, all of these were named as the regulations. Okay, and the laws which had been formulated after this act or under this act were named as the acts. So if the question asks you in the examination, like what is the definition of the regulations and acts as per the Charter Act of 1833? So remember, the laws which had been made before the Charter Act of 1833, these all were renamed as a regulations, and all the laws which made under the Charter Act of 1833 and after it, these were named as the acts. Got it? Thereafter, it ended the activities of East India Company as a commercial body, which became a purely administrative body. It provided that the company's territories in India were held by it in trust for His Majesty, his heirs, and successors. So basically, what happened? Like the trading nature of the East India Company was now abolished. All right, and the company right now purely transformed into the administrative body. Got it? And one of the reason behind this is that because as a trading nature, they were focusing on the profit, okay, more in comparison with the looking after British interest. Because all these were the traders. And for any trader, the main thing which matters a lot is the profit. So instead of focusing on serving the British needs and the interests, these were highly focusing on earning the profit. So because of this, the British government through the Charter Act of 1833 revoked the commercial functioning of the company. All right, so that instead of focusing on profit only, they could serve to the British requirements and the British needs. All right, and also the territories which were occupied, or you can say which were acquired by the company, were now held to be under the trust of His Majesty. It means the Queen, Queen's heirs, and the successors. All right, it means that these were no longer under the control of the British government, sorry, British East India Company, but under the control of the British Queen. All right, and the Charter Act of 1833 attempted to introduce a system of open competition for selection of civil servants and stated that the Indian should not be debarred from holding any place, office, and employment under the company. So basically what's happened, that prior to this act, only some selected, you can say, people had given a chance to sit in the examination of the civil servants. Those people who would serving the Indian territory in the name of British government. All right, but by virtue of this act, this special selection criteria was revoked and the open competition was promoted. Okay, so that more and more people could sit into the civil servants examination. Thereafter, the ban on Indians were also lifted. It means that prior to this act, the Indians were not allowed to hold any place, any office, and seek any employment under the company. Alright, but after this act, the provisions were made so that the restrictions on Indians could be revoked. However, this provision was negated after the opposition from the court of directors. But the court of directors, which had the power to governing the company's affairs, all right, the court of directors were not in the favor of letting Indians into the places, offices, and employments under the company. All right. So after the opposition, and you can say after the revolt of the court of directors, finally this provision was not implemented, but rest all others were implemented. All right. So remember these things. Thereafter, the Charter Act of 1853. All right. This was the last of the series of Charter Act passed by the British Parliament between the 1793 and the 1853. It was a significant constitutional landmark. So you could say that basically the time period between the 1793 to the 1853, almost for the time period of 60 years, the acts which were passed in India were the Charter Acts, or you can say were basically the royal orders. All right. And the Charter Act of 1853 was the last act in that series. Okay. And it's having a significant constitutional landmark. How? Let's see. The features of this act were as follows. The first, it separated for the first time the legislative and the executive functions of the Governor General's Council. It means that again the same thing. If the Governor General's Council is performing 20 functions, all right, so basically the legislative functions and the executive functions were separated from each other. All right, so this is the first thing. It provided for addition of 6 new members called legislative councillors to the council. Okay, it means that the Governor General's Council, which was established as a 4-member body, okay, now these were supposed to add 6 new members, and these members would be appointed in the name of legislative councillors to the council. All right. In other words, basically it established a separate Governor General's Legislative Council, which came to be known as the Indian Central Legislative Council. All right. So basically you could say that a total of new type, or you can say a totally new type of legislative council was proposed under this particular theme, like the Indian Central Legislative Council. This legislative wing of the council functioned as a mini parliament. All right, because this having the legislative power, and basically we know that whenever we talk about the democracy, whenever we talk about the democracy, or you could say that whenever we talk about the governance structure, all right, so these are generally of 3 types. All right, first is the legislative powers, thereafter the executive powers, and third is the judicial powers, legislative powers, executive powers, and judicial powers. Okay, so legislative powers basically vested with the parliaments. Okay, executive power basically vested with the, you can say, the executive of the central government. Also, or the state government. But if the state government will be there, then this will be a legislative assembly. But here we have put parliament, so it means the central government. And the judicial powers vested with the courts. So this is the general division of the, you can say, the governance structure or the democratical structure. All right. And the, you can say, the strength of the democracy is totally dependent upon the separation and, you can say, division of powers. Like up to what extent the powers are separated and divided amongst these three stakeholders. Okay, the legislative powers means the power of making rules and regulations vested with the parliament. Executive powers means the implementation of that rules and regulations which had been formulated by the parliament is vested with the central government ministers, central government officials, right? Judicial power means whatsoever is going on, how the things are going on, and what should be the manner. All these powers are vested with the courts. All right. So if we look at here and then we go there, then we will see that the legislative powers had been granted to the Indian Central Legislative Council or the 6 legislative councillors. So when the word legislative mentioned here, it means that automatically this will become the mini parliament. All right. And this is adopting the same procedures as the British Parliament, which they had in the Britain. Thus, the legislation for the first time was treated as a special function of the government, requiring the special machinery and the special process. Okay, so that is the legislative modification made to the governing on India. All right. Introduce an open competition system of selection and recruitment of the civil servants, which was already introduced in the Charter Act of 1833, but due to the opposition by the Court of Directors, that was not implemented fully. But again, in the Charter Act of 1853, that was purposed. The covenanted civil service was thus thrown open to the Indians also. So basically there are two types of civil services, covenant and uncovenant. Covenant basically the high civil servant post, and uncovenant is basically low civil servant posts. So basically when the civil services introduced in India, the covenant services were restricted to the British only. It means that only the British person could participate into the covenant services, and the uncovenant services were open to Indians also. All right. But after the Charter Act of 1853, basically the Indians were also invited into the covenant services. It means that they could be also appointed as a high post of the civil services. Accordingly, the Macaulay Committee, the Committee on the Indian Civil Service, was appointed in 1854. All right, extended the company's rule and allowed it to retain the possession of the Indian territories on trust for the British Crown. It means that, however, company's role as a trader and as an administrator was deprived, but still the company had the power to retain the possession of the acquired, or you can say the Indian territories, but under the name of British Crown. Still, the role is indirectly, or you can say supervisory. but it did not specify any particular period, unlike the previous charters. Like in the previous charters, the period was 20 years, right? But in the 1853 Charter Act, no certain period was defined. This was a clear indication that the company's rule could be terminated at any time by the parliament. All right. It introduced for the first time the local representation of Indian Central Legislative Council. Okay. Of the 6 new legislative members of the Governor General's Council, 4 members were appointed by the local or the provincial governments of Madras, Bombay, Bengal, and Agra. All right. So students, basically in this lecture we have finished till here. In the next lecture we will continue from here. All right. Till then, just revise all the facts and figures which we have discussed in this lecture and be ready for the another lecture. With this note, let's end this lecture and thank you.